Masters of the Universe Origins Evil Warriors is the subject of today's video. So, I have only 3 characters at this point in time. Sorry, that would be 4. 4 characters, but in front of you I'm only showing 3. There is also another. So, these Evil Warriors, Skeletor, Trapjaw, and Mer-man, were released in different waves. So, Skeletor came in Wave 1 and Wave 2. Trapjaw came in Wave 3, if I'm not mistaken, and then Mer-man Wave 4. Now, the ones that I am missing from Evil Warriors that also were released, and they're almost next to impossible to find, would be Evil Lyn, Beastman, Scareglow, the evil ghost of Skeletor, and I believe that would be all of them at the moment. So I'm missing 3 in particular. So there is more coming, I understand, this year. It will see the release of Triclops, Ninjor, Hordak, and a couple of other ones, but those are yet to come. Anyhow, let's take a closer look at Skeletor first, the Overlord of Evil and the arch nemesis of He-Man. The figure is made pretty much along the same lines as the vintage figure from back in the 80s, the same style. The only major difference is that it would include a more modern articulation, which the vintage one didn't have. So, if you've seen my previous video where I talk about He-Man and Heroic Warriors from Origins, then you would understand that the articulation is pretty much on the same level. So there is articulation in the elbows, so they can actually bend their arms, which the vintage ones could not do. There is articulation in the wrist, so they can rotate their wrist, can move the hand forward and backward. And there is articulation in the knees, so they can actually bend their knees this time around. The head can turn left and right, and it's on a ball joint, so it can tilt slightly sideways, like this much about. And there is waist articulation, so they can turn around 360 degrees. And other than that, there is certain things that they actually lack compared to the vintage. So the Heroic Warriors, and then of course including Skeletor and his henchmen, they do not have the waist punch action, so their waists are not spring-loaded like the vintage figures were. So there is no spring-loaded waist for the action feature of a waistline punch. So these cannot do that. So he comes with his crossbones harness that he wears, and also a belt. And those are removable. I just don't really remove them. And as you can tell, this harness usually comes off at the back here. It's a bit of a pain trying to always pin it back, but there we go. It should hold, I hope. So he comes with 2 weapons, just like the vintage one. He comes with his Havoc staff, which looks pretty much exactly identical to the 80s one. Not much of a difference there. He also comes with 1/2 of the power sword, so he can join it. You see the holes here, so he could join it to the He-Man one and form one sword, just like was the case with the vintage versions of He-Man and Skeletor. And he can carry that sword in either left or the right hand. Now the Havoc staff can only fit in his right hand, due to the fact that the left hand, as you can tell, is more of an open hand. So thanks to the sword guard here, he can actually pin on the sword onto his left hand. Now, the Skeletor's steed that he rides into battle, meaning Panthor, is the other figure I'm going to show you. So there he is. He's just as large as Bottle Cat, and I believe it's pretty much the same sculpt with some minor differences. Obviously, Panthor is purple, has a green saddle, and he doesn't wear any battle masks or anything like that. So I'll show you how Skeletor looks like sitting on top of him. let's just zoom out a little bit. So there he is. Panthor and Skeletor. I guess I should push him down a little bit more. There we go. Much better. And then let's take a look over here from the front. The saddle on Panthor is removable. And Panthor's mouth can close and open. And the vintage version had its mouth just sculpted open, and that was it. You couldn't really close it. And he has additional articulation, unlike the vintage one, so he can move his head up and down. He can move it sideways, which is pretty neat. Gives you a little bit more posability. And he looks menacing with those piercing eyes and sharp teeth and such. So he came out pretty well, and I would let's take off the Skeletor for a moment. I would highly recommend him for those of you who missed out on Masters of the Universe, Masters of the Universe Classics Panthor, who is now extremely overpriced these days on a secondary market. So I think this version of Panthor would be a sort of a cheaper option in compared to the Classics one, because the Classics figures do fit on Battle Cat and Panthor with ease, and they don't look bad at all. Now you would probably think, because you see such a big figure, he would be bulky, but not really though. It's just a hollow plastic, so he's very light when you hold him in your hand. I'll show you the other articulation he has, which is again same as Battle Cat's that I showed in my previous video. So his legs can move forward and backward. There is articulation in the knees, and the paws are sculpted on in the sense that there is no articulation, so they cannot move the paw cannot move left or right, but in the knees, yes, he can. So he can even, he can bend it, so there is some articulation there that comes in useful. The tail has articulation as well. Now the tail is not bendable, so don't attempt to bend it, you will just break it. It's made of a hard plastic, so it's not bendable by any means, but it can turn left to right all the way around, can straighten up that much, and the back legs also have the same kind of articulation in the knees, but nothing in the paws. So you can bend the leg, and you can pose them in a sort of a running position. And I already mentioned regarding the head, so it's a pretty decent looking figure for a representation of Panthor, and it looks pretty neat. So yeah, that would be Panthor. Let's put him aside here. Now going back to the Evil Warriors here, we're going to take a look next at Trapjaw. His original known name before he became Trapjaw, at least according to the 2000X comic book, was that he was called Cronus, and he was a henchman under Skeletor, who at that time was known as Keldor. And Trapjaw here, before he became Trapjaw, while he was named Cronus, and he looked quite different, almost humanoid, he was very ambitious, and he wanted to overthrow Keldor and just take over, and eventually overthrow specifically Skeletor, and take over the leadership. And needless to say, he lost that fight. I will not tell you what happened next, but for those of you who read that comic book, you know exactly what happened to him after that an unsuccessful rebellion. But going back to the figure itself again looks like a very good representation of the vintage 80s Trapjaw. He looks exactly the same, with the addition, of course, once more, of the articulation. And he does come with the extra weapons, just like the 80s one. And the sculpting looks pretty much spot on, exactly the same. Now, in the vintage one, you could close and open the lower part of the jaw. However, on mine, he's not able to close it. It feels very tight, and when I try to close it, there is some resistance there, so I don't like to force it. It might just break the jaw because the plastic looks a bit fragile. But if I exclude that, he's able to turn the head left and right. He has the little loophole that's used in the vintage version to just slide him down a piece of string between 2 points. So that's how he was portrayed in the vintage commercials. He comes with interchangeable mechanical arm that has different attachments, just like the vintage one. So there is the laser one, and then there is the hook that also fits in there, so you can interchange any of the three. And comes with the last one being a claw, a mechanical claw. And all three of these attachments look exactly like the same type of attachments that came with the 80s version. And each of these attachments has the little hook to put them right on his belt here, the ones that he's not using. Again, same like the 80s figure. So we can just attach them right back. I like to display mine with the laser. Well, I put these other ones stored on his belt. The belt is removable, and it's in a fluorescent green color. So even the paint scheme is the same, like the old figure. And it has a skull with the crossed bones. Now the other thing about these figures, which I believe I already mentioned also in my other video about the He-Man and the Heroic Warriors, the body pieces can be removed on these figures, which is practically the reminiscent or the same idea like the Marvel Mashers that came from Hasbro a few years back. Now, I don't like to do that, so that's why I don't attempt to really remove anything. So that's only good for those of you guys who like to customize and just interchange body parts. The vintage figures were able to switch to at least switch the arms between the characters, and in some cases the heads. But again, even with the vintage ones, I never attempted to do that. So these would be almost like fall apart figures, meaning you can switch body parts between them and weapons and such. So that would be Trapjaw, same articulation like Skeletor, pretty much. He does not come with the regular arm to replace the mechanical one, so he only comes with the robotic one. Now, however, there will be one more version coming of him that will be an exclusive to the Target store in the States, and that version of him would be him the way he looked as Cronus, and that version of him will be packaged with Skeletor he will be packaged with the Keldor, meaning the original alter ego of Skeletor. So those two figures will be packaged together, and they will have some extra pieces and some such. But I don't think that those particular ones will be released as single cards. Now, the last of the four, I keep forgetting Panthor there. The last one will be Mer-man, the warlord of the seas, or specifically the Rakash Sea on Eternia. And again, striking resemblance of the vintage version of him, with the head that's pretty much just a repaint of Stinkor's head, even though Stinkor has not come out in a figure form in the Origins just yet. But the same head in the vintage line was used for Mer-man and Stinkor. Mer-man comes with a harness, a very bright yellow harness, and as some people like to call this sword of his that also existed in the 80s. It's a fishbone sword, but to me and to lots of other people, I noticed it resembles more a bright yellow corn because of all these little bits on the side and such. But you can tell it's a fishbone sword. The handle looks pretty much like a part of a bone. So he only comes with the sword. There is no trident or anything like that, unfortunately. But since he's supposed to be the same as the vintage one, then of course the vintage one only came with the sword. There was no additional weaponry. And yes, the harness is removable. The body parts can also be taken apart. The articulation is the same, again, as the other two. And that would be pretty much it as far as Mer-man goes. So another great looking figure from this series. And the last part I would like to show you is just some of the card backs of these guys. So here is the card back of Skeletor. He says the nefarious overlord Skeletor wants to control the power within Castle Grayskull. And each of these guys again have a mini comic book. And some of those mini comic books I already showed in my previous video. And here is the figure checklist, and then some instructions about putting the Havoc stuff into his hand and to twist into powerful battle positions. But this was an attempt to replicate the idea that he had the waist power punch feature in the vintage line. And then of course the front of the card, modern posing, retro play. Some cards don't have this little yellow burst and some do. And then the second one, the second card would be that of Trapjaw. Almost exactly the same type of art as the vintage one. And what I mentioned about his loophole on the helmet, that he can just slide down on a string and attack the enemy in that way. And then again, the instruction about putting the weapons, open and close the draw, which unfortunately in case of mine doesn't seem to work. And then the figure checklist. These two guys are next to impossible to find. Orko and Scareglow. Some people did find them, but they don't seem to be numerous, not really. And I already mentioned and talked about He-Man and Many Faces in my previous video. And then the last card will be that of Mer-man. And interesting to note that this octopus creature appeared in one of the early Masters of the Universe comics back in the 80s. And He-Man was seen in a particular, in that particular mini comic book I'm referring to, fighting this same exact creature. So it's a nice touch that they included one of the old monsters from the old mini comics. So again, the instruction how to put the sword, and then of course which figures come in this particular wave. I also have Roboto, but I'll have to do a small segment on him in a different video. I already talked about She-Ra. Zodak is another one I did not have the chance to see yet. So that would be the card of Mer-man. Anyway, that would be all of them for the moment. I'll try and show you guys next time the short video on Roboto from the Origins. So thanks for watching, guys, and I'll catch you again next time. Bye.